Hey folks, welcome to Chess University. I'm International Master Kostya Kavutsky, and today I'll be doing a lesson for the 1750 group. Um, Real quick, I know there's, I imagine, quite a few number of people watching. If you're in the chat, please say hi, and let's do a quick sound check to make sure that you guys can hear and see the screen. I'm also curious where everyone is from. 'Cause I know we've got a ton of people here. I'm curious from where you're watching. Um, so if you want to say hi and where you're from, that would be cool. I'm one of the main instructors for Chess University. This is my first of a few lessons this month, so you'll be seeing me again. I live in California, which is where I grew up. And I actually made my international master title um, late last year. At the end of November, I earned it, and it was officially confirmed earlier this year in March. So great to see we have a very lively chat. This is a really exciting month for us, as you guys can imagine, because we're able to just run this program for free for basically every chess player in the world. And I think it's actually a really cool learning structure because you get several hours of training every month, live training where you can ask questions of the instructor. Then you get the PGN files so you can go over the examples yourselves, analyze deeper, and so on. And then like training exercises and that stuff as well. I think it's a very cost-effective way of improving your chess. So I'm very happy to be a part of this program. All right. Seems like the sound is working, and we're going to get started with the lesson. So the topic I have today is called Advanced Defending. It's an interesting topic because not a whole lot of time is spent on talking about defense. Because you know, we like to think about the initiative more, we like to think about attacking more. Um, it can be very unpleasant to defend bad positions, and there's not a whole lot of advice to give when you have a bad position and you're trying to defend. But I take that as a challenge, and I want to try to give you guys some practical tips and advice on some things to think about when you're defending that maybe you didn't consider before, or at least my perspective on what defense is really all about. We'll be looking at a variety of examples today. Um, some of the positions will range from the defensive sides, their position being anywhere from completely fine to even slightly better to completely lost. And we're going to be talking about how to defend in different cases, and maybe I can show you guys some interesting ideas as well. Um, So if you're in the chat at some point, well, probably many points throughout the lesson, I'll be asking you guys random questions like, oh, what should white play in this position? What should black play? What do you think of this move? Because there is some lag, I do want to give you guys some time to respond. So I'll ask a question, then continue talking about something else in the position. And because there's so many of you, it'd be cool if we kept the chat very relevant and on topic. I do like to make my lessons as interactive as possible. So if you ever have a specific question, about about the position at hand. Um, just try to be as clear as possible with what move you're talking about, because sometimes I might skip ahead a few moves, and you might say like, "Oh, you missed the mate in two," and I'm like, "What? Well, in which position?" So it has to be for if you can just make your question specific as to what position you're referencing, that would be really, really great, and that would save us a lot of time. Okay, so this first position, actually, we're going to look at it from Black's point of view. Um, this was from the candidates match 1984 between Mr. Garry Kasparov playing white against Vasily Smyslov, the ex-world champion, playing black. Now, for those of you that know chess history, you guys will know that this was the final candidates match that Kasparov had to win before um, going on to face Karpov in the World Championship. Um, Smyslov at the time was a very old player. I think he was in his 60s, which today would be unheard of, a player in their 60s to be reaching the Canada's final. But that's just what makes his feat so amazing. But in this game, even though Kasparov playing white here has a completely winning position, in fact did not end up winning this game. He missed his chance, and thanks to some creative defense by Smyslov, he was able to escape with black in this one. So let's take a look at the position. White's last move was bishop to d3, with a not so subtle threat of queen takes h7. And, well, let me ask you guys here while I talk a little bit about defense. What should black do? What is your first instinct here? If you're playing black and you're trying to defend your position, what would you do in this position? What are your suggestions? Okay, I see some knight g6 right away. So I'll let your suggestions come in and then we'll talk about them one by one. Keep in mind, let me give you guys a small hint here. Black's position is lost. So even if you play objectively the best move, let's say you play the computer move here, that doesn't mean that's going to give you the best chance of saving the game. So I think from a computer's point of view, this position is like +3, plus 3.5. And what you're trying to do in this case, we realize we're dead lost. We're just looking for, let's say, the most practical move. What gives us the best chance of potentially saving the position? What would give us the best chance? Well, that's a question of making it hard for your opponent to finish you off. What does that mean? That means you're trying to look for continuations where maybe the win isn't so obvious for white, and you give them a chance to still mess up the game. And this is very important because chess is a game played between two humans. It's not a game played between computers. So I think the computer here recommends knight g6 as one of its main moves. I don't remember exactly. But this isn't such a great defense because, well, you're hanging the knight on c6. Now we can't take on c6 right away because queen takes d3 and black is actually perfectly fine. But white can throw in bishop c4 check. King has to move and then take the knight. And from a computer's point of view, it's like, okay, well, I didn't get checkmated, but I did lose a piece, and that's better than getting mated. But from a human point of view, it's like, well, this position is pointless to continue. Now we're just down a piece, and our king isn't going to be safe anyways. And I mean, against a player of Kasparov's level, you know, you just resign here. There's really no point in continuing the game. So the first point is that the computer defense is not always going to be the best in terms of a position where you're just dead lost in any case anyways. And so you're just looking for a way to make it somewhat tricky for your opponent. I saw a suggestion of g6 as well, which is obviously a very natural move. This weakens the king even further, and white wins with bishop c4 check. King has to go to g7 or h8, and then after d5, black can again resign because this knight is hanging. If the knight moves, bishop d4 check is going to come into the position, and the king is getting mated. King h6, queen h4, game over. What to do? I think I saw an option for rook f6. Now rook f6 is starting to get closer because here the idea is to give the king some escape. Definitely white is winning if we take, and then king moves, and then bishop c4 comes. So if king f7, bishop c4 check, and black gets mated, or very, very close. Basically, black will lose all the pieces on the board. And if you went over to f8, probably this is better. I think after bishop c4, black doesn't really have a good defense to queen h8 check anyways, because rook h6 would be nice, but it's covered by your bishop. So this is, I think, a more creative try. Still definitely falls very short. Okay, I'm seeing a ton of suggestions from h6. In fact, I think I'm just seeing one guy suggesting h6 over and over again. Reasonable move. I imagine queen h7 check is winning, but maybe even stronger is bishop takes h6. I always like making moves where I have an obvious check, but then I do something else. Bishop h6, the point is if black takes, then queen h7 is made. It doesn't allow the king to escape through f7. If black does nothing, I'm not sure what else black has here. Now we're threatening to play check and then take this pawn, and definitely this is lost as well. By the way, shout out to Marek, who's helping out with the moderating, and I see he's summing up some of my key suggestions, so I really appreciate that. Okay, and now let's put something on the f5 square, because I see a lot of those suggestions. So knight f5, we don't really have to look at it too seriously because white can minimum take the knight on c6, and this is just lost. Rook f5, this is definitely possible, and I think unfortunately this falls short to either bishop c4 check right away or d5, and black's position is just totally collapsing. But I like rook f5. This is definitely, this doesn't make it super easy for white to win, but okay. In any case, there's no really perfect answer here because, well, whatever you do, you're gonna be lost anyways. So I really like what Smyslov did, and I have been watching the chat very carefully. I'm not sure if anyone suggested the move. Actually, I think I did see it a few times. Okay, so some of you, your intuition is on point. So the move was queen d6. Now, I'm not saying this is, again, objectively the best move. Maybe it is, but it ended up working in this game, and I think we can definitely learn from that. So his point is, okay, I'm not saving the king side. I'm giving up h7, and I'm gonna run with the king and try to find some nesting on e8. And queen d6 is more important than any other move black can play because the queen is, well, as we saw in the previous position, just completely offsides on a3. He brings it back to d6 where he controls a lot of squares and secures the knight on c6 so that stops hanging in every variation, and he prepares to try and transfer the king over. Okay, but it's not over. So white takes on h7, king f7. And now a mistake that a lot of players make when they're attacking is, well, they see a check and they give a check. So they would just play bishop c4 check almost immediately, but then the black king starts running away, and if the black king can get to b7, I mean, I think the king will actually be very reasonably safe. So this isn't such a trivial position. White can take the pawn on g7. There's no rook g8 because of the bishop on c4. And white is winning, no doubt about it, but I think black is still kicking. Especially with the two knights kind of supporting each other, this can often be a very solid construction in front of the king because the two knights are very solid and they control many squares that can be potentially used by enemy pieces. Queen h5 check would definitely be a very reasonable choice because this prevents the king from going to e8. So this is a strong suggestion. If we went back to g8, we would just get mated with bishop c4 or bishop h7, just leads to forced mate or the loss of all of black's pieces. Sometimes, guys, I do like to not exaggerate, but sometimes getting checkmated and losing all of your pieces to me is kind of like interchangeable. So maybe you're not exactly mated, but you will lose all your pieces, and to me that's kind of the same thing. So I'll just keep in mind that's how I describe things sometimes. After queen h5, I imagine black would have to play g6, supported by the knight on e7. And wherever white gives a check from next, then the king can start sliding over to e8. And black is at least fighting. And I would say maybe this is the second maybe the second point of today in terms of defense. The idea is just to keep fighting. Just keep fighting for one more move, right? If you give your opponent more and more moves to find, then you never know. human chess players are very, very strong at certain things, and a lot of times a very common mistake that players make is they relax very early. Especially in completely winning positions, they just think, oh, game is over, I'm just gonna collect everything and win the game. And guess what? I mean, this is kind of self-evident. The second you relax, you're increasing your chances of screwing up the win 3 or 4 times. As soon as you kind of lose focus and relax, then that's when you're most likely to blunder away a winning position. So keep that in mind. Just because you know your position is lost doesn't mean you can't keep testing your opponent and test their nerves a little bit to see how they're going to finish you off. Um, well, Kasparov is Kasparov for a reason. He finds the strongest move, Rook b5. And this rook is going to be very active along the 5th rank. And he's controlling basically every square, and now things are getting really bad. Black played knight takes d4, so he's capturing a pawn. And here is where Kasparov blows the win. So let me ask you guys here, maybe you can throw some suggestions. What should white do in this position? How does white finish this off? It's not that easy. For a computer, it's easy. Oh, +4, +8, you know, whatever. But for a human, especially with knights on the board, and I know a lot of you guys, I imagine, are playing Blitz and Rapid. These kinds of positions are messed up all the time. I mean, look no further than the Grand Chess Tour, right? You guys, I'm sure, watched that. The Rapid events in Paris and Leuven. How many winning positions were then spoiled by not even a blunder, but just one inaccuracy, second inaccuracy, missing a win here. Somehow the position gets complicated, and then the blunder happens, and everything turns. So I'll give you guys a second to try to figure out what you would play with white. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Okay, I see some suggestions for queen h5 check. This, I think, again, would be met with g6, and then the king is going to try to run to e8. Given the chance, black would love to play c5 and just secure this knight on d4. Rook g5 is a very sensible suggestion, and I believe white is winning after this move. Bishop h6 is a blunder. I see a couple people suggesting that because of queen takes h6, and I don't see how white justifies the piece here. Bishop c4 check I think is possible, but kind of lets the king start running as well. So I'll show you guys the right continuation, then I'll show you what happened in the game, because amazingly Kasparov wasn't able to convert this one. So the right move was actually to just take the knight on d4. I think a few of you suggested that. And after queen takes d4, rook g5. Bishop g6 is a very interesting move here. I think someone just suggested that. Knight takes g6 is met with rook f5. And I think white is winning here because black's king is so weak. So king e7, for example. We can even give check first, or we can just take the knight. And the weakness of black's king, I think it's not exactly over just yet, but it is. This position would be good for white. Oh, rook g5? Yeah, is a blunder. You guys are right. Knight f3 check would take the rook. I mean, maybe white is still good because the king is so weak, but yeah, rook g5 right away would run into knight f3 check. Thank you for pointing that out. And that's why it's important to actually first take this knight on d4. Queen takes d4 and then play rook to g5. And this, I think, is very strong. The rook does a couple things on g5. Of course, it attacks g7, but I think even more importantly, it defends the king along the g file, so there's no queen to g4 with a potential for perpetual check. And this is very important because if black has zero counterplay, then the position is going to be very, very strong for white. He just brings in the rook, and the king just won't be able to survive. Black's only chance here is some kind of slip or blunder to be able to get a perpetual check, but the rook on g5 controls everything. And it's not so easy. Queen f6 might be played. Bishop c4 check, king e8, rook takes g7. This position is winning, but it's not over. But I think if we got to this point, Kasparov would be able to win because the king is very, very weak, and as long as white doesn't blunder this f2 pawn too quickly, then he should be able to convert his advantage. This is also the kind of position where you can even start running the h-pawn down the board and it's game over. Okay, we'll wrap this one up because I do want to get to the next example, but queen e4 was actually Kasparov's move, which makes sense to centralize the queen and attack the knight and everything. Rook a d8 was played, just supporting this knight on d4. And already, black is kind of out of the woods. This knight is somewhat secure, and c5 is coming, and black just has everything covered. Bishop takes d4 was played, queen takes d4, rook f5 check. It's a nice move, but actually this just leads to a draw. Black took on f5, queen f5, and the players repeated moves with queen f5 and so on, and agreed to a draw. So just like that, you know, one slip, and even one of the greatest attacking players of all time, Garry Kasparov, wasn't able to find the precise route to finish things off. So if you guys have any general questions about defense so far, please let me know in the chat. And I'm going to move on to our next example here. I see the question in the chat about time trouble. It is possible that time trouble was an issue in that game, but considering that the critical moment was like move 20, move 25, maybe not. And time trouble is a very real part of classical chess. So I think that's a very relevant question because, yeah, a lot of times if you're attacking, if you have winning position, you're spending a lot of time to look for tactics. And if your opponent is defending very stubbornly, very rigorously, it can be very easy to mess things up. So our next example here, we're taking black's perspective again. And here, we have kind of a typical IQP position, isolated queen pawn. Those of you that know a thing or two about the IQP, you know that the side holding it has this weakness to defend on d4, but on the other hand, does get more active pieces. The knight on e5 is very active, bishop on b3 is potentially very strong, and white's rooks are nicely centralized. Nevertheless, white has given up the dark squared bishop here, and I think black's position in this case is actually preferable, because the king seems to be safe. All of black's pieces are developed to reasonable squares. The rook on d6 is a little bit awkward. But I think black's position is solid. As long as black isn't getting attacked on the king side, then white is just going to have to defend this d4 pawn. So here the best move, in my opinion, was rook to d8. Just drop the rook back, and then put the bishop on d6, and then at some point black can play b4 and start getting counterplay. In the game, black played the move bishop to d5, which to me was a mistake, a very clear mistake. This move is actually very thematic because when playing against the IQP, we're taught to often trade pieces, but I think this was not a good move. I see knight d5 as a suggestion. Knight d5 seems like a very reasonable move. The problem is white would drop back with the bishop to c2, threatening our favorite queen h7 mate. And in this case, black doesn't have anything better than just to retreat with the knight back to f6 and defend. And if I was white, I would probably repeat moves here because I think white's position is worse. So knight d5 is a very solid move. Because you're not giving up more than equality. But black wouldn't be getting more than a draw in this case. If you wanted to be more ambitious, you would probably not want to make this kind of move. After bishop c2, black doesn't really have any useful options because we don't really want to play g6 unless we have to, because this opens up all kinds of potential sacrifices. In fact, we might see something like this in the game. Not that it's necessarily working right away, but it is a very serious concession to make in this kind of position. It's typically better to defend your king with pieces than having to advance pawns. Well, in any case, bishop d5 was played. Okay, trying to trade pieces, and that seems like a reasonable approach. But the problem is that black is giving up a very important light square defender. And we'll see in this game, black gets torched on the light squares a little bit. By the way, playing here are two players, Dotov versus Golden, who both ended up becoming grandmasters. But this was back also actually in 1984, where they were, let's say, master level players, 22, 2300. And then they later went on to become grandmasters. In fact, Golden is currently living in the US. It's like a 2600 level player. Yeah, I can't spell out the names. So this move bishop d5 in this case is a mistake because white takes this bishop on d5 and gets rid of black's defender of the light squares. And after knight takes d5, the position is, I think, getting closer to equal or dynamically balanced. White played king h1, I think securing his king just on a light square so that it's slightly safer, and just seeing what move black is going to make. And here comes a blunder. Now a move like queen b6, this would be very solid here, and the position would remain balanced. But black played g6. So black weakens the king side, and the idea is to put the bishop on g7 where it's going to be really solid. But this invites a sacrifice on g6, and white does not hesitate. So knight takes g6. Well, that came as a shock. I'm sure Golden wasn't expecting this to happen, or maybe he was, he just miscalculated. F takes g6. And now queen takes g6 check is not a great move because rook g7. And actually black is defending very nicely from the 7th rank. Note that queen takes h6 fails to rook h7 with a little pin along the h-file. So what was white's idea here? Let's open it up. What do you guys think white should play in this position? White to play and justify the piece sacrifice. What was white's idea? To answer the question previously, why didn't white play bishop c2? I think he could have. Black would have responded knight f6 and just covered h7. And I see the right move showing up a lot, so it seems like you guys are tactically very alert. In fact, rook takes e6 is an absolute crushing move here. Completely wrecking black on the light squares. And I saw a very good question in the chat from someone who asked, well, all of black's pawns were on the light squares, f7, g6, e6, so how could the light squares possibly be weak? That's a very fair point. In fact, I think black's structure is secure, but the point is that if the structure collapses, then everything collapses. And in this case, black's entire position has been ripped apart. And white is winning his material back with potentially some interest. Okay, so black has to accept rook takes e6. Bishop takes d5. Okay, so white is a full rook down, but of course the rook on e6 is hanging. Pawn on g6 is hanging to queen takes g6. And if white wins back the rook, he's going to have 2 or 3 extra pawns. A move like rook e7, of course white isn't going to cash in too quickly. He's going to play queen takes g6 check. Rook is pinned, so we can't take. And next move, bishop takes e6, basically no matter what. And black is lost. Okay, so what should black do? How do we save this position? I see a lot of people are asking about this king h1, this mysterious king move. You know, in a practical game, when you're the side with the initiative but you don't have any, let's say, immediate threats, sometimes it's useful to improve your king. Just improve the king 1 square. Put it on a square where it's even safer than it was before, if possible, and pass the move to your opponent. Now, if your opponent doesn't have any immediate counterplay and they just have to shuffle, a lot of times a very quiet move like this drives your opponent to do something rash. In this case, black kind of blundered with g6. I don't think g6 is a bad move strategically. It was a bad move tactically. But in other cases, and I've experienced this a lot when playing against players, if I'm the one who's putting pressure, they're defending, especially if they're lower rated, and I make some quiet move, they immediately kind of, they can't really handle the pressure, and they immediately lash out. They make a new weakness, they put a piece on a square that's kind of offsides, they give you some kind of opportunity for tactics. It's actually surprisingly difficult to make a move in the position that doesn't hurt anything, that does no harm. It's kind of like the drawback principle. Okay, I see the right suggestion from many of you, which is nice to see. In fact, king f7 is just the only move here for black to keep the game going. Now black is going to be under huge fire, but we'll see it's not going to be such a trivial win. So we're defending g6, and we're holding on to the material. So it's kind of the only move that keeps the material. I guess this leads us to our next point about defense. When you're defending, at least try to earn something for your efforts. You know, like if you're getting mated and you're down 3 pawns, it's just a very very difficult position. You're not going to survive. So if you're getting mated no matter what, at least have some material. Get a rook, a piece, a couple pawns, so that if your opponent does mess up, does screw up the attack and lets you off the hook, you'll be up in material at the end. If you're just down material and getting mated, that means that, okay, even if their attack doesn't succeed, they're still winning because they're up so much material. So being materialistic in these cases just gives you a practical chance of winning later on. Well, white took on e6, king takes, queen takes g6, king d7. Okay, black is running, and the material has been established that black now has an extra piece, but for 3 pawns. So material-wise, white is doing just fine. 3 pawns for the piece is a lot, but it's more important that white is keeping the initiative, because white's pawns are not that strong. Like these pawns here in front of the king, they're not exactly all that mobile. And if black is given a chance to get his king to safety, get his bishop out, black should be fine. He'll have a lot of counterplay. So white really needs to play for the initiative here. Now the strongest move is queen f7 check, forcing bishop e7, and now d5. And I think this would be winning for white, maybe even immediately, because d6 is a very strong threat. And it's hard to see how black is going to defend against this. You can try king c8. So d6, we can take it. But maybe white can play d6 anyways. Bishop takes, queen check, or queen e8 check, win the bishop next move, and game over. Instead, white play rook e1, which I think makes a lot of sense as well. Threatening queen e6 check, king d8, whoops, and queen e8 mate. Black played bishop e7, which is kind of the only move. So queen e8 check, you can play king d8. d5 was played. Queen c5, queen e6 check, and king d8. Okay, guys, white to play and win. So I'll give you guys a chance to find the strongest move. If I remember correctly, I believe that there is only one clear win in this position. Or maybe one idea that's clearly winning. So I'll give you guys a chance to find it, because calculation is a big part of chess. And, well, as you may have guessed, in fact, white did not find the winning move here, and actually ended up losing the game. I mean, even if white doesn't find the win, the position is still good for white, or maybe more balanced. But slowly, white made one or two mistakes. Black was able to unravel, get his pieces out, or get his bishop out, I should say, get his king to safety, and was able to outplay his opponent and ended up winning the game. Okay, let's take a look at some of your suggestions. In fact, I don't think I have seen the winning move so far in the suggestions. Okay, well, d6. This would be nice if bishop takes d6, because queen e8 is immediate mate. But after queen takes d6, I actually don't see how white continues here. Because queen g8 check, we play king d7. To me, it looks like black is fine. Maybe white will have some perpetual checks, but I think if I was black, I'm already playing for a win. I'm going to try to run away with my king and try to use my extra piece. So d6 kind of jumps the gun a little bit. It doesn't work. Queen g8 check, black plays king d7, and white needs some follow-up here. We can repeat moves with queen e6, but that doesn't win for white, obviously. So what to do in this position? Queen takes a6. I think this is a very reasonable suggestion. A lot of times if you're playing pawns against the piece, you do want to just start collecting pawns if your opponent has no counterplay. Maybe black can get away with playing queen takes d5. And black might be okay here, although I think black's position is very, very shaky. Okay, I think I finally see the winning idea for white. b4. Now, this move isn't just about attacking the queen. Black will see this attack. This is more about displacing the queen, because the queen was actually kind of perfectly placed. And after white would play b4 here, black is losing he's losing the coordination. So for example, queen d6 seems like most natural move, would be met with queen g8 check, king d7, and now rook e6 with tempo. And the queen is very, very short on squares. In fact, the only move that's not immediately covered is queen takes d5. But as soon as the queens line up, I know you guys are always looking for tactics. Rook takes e7 check. Best is to play king c6 or king d6. It doesn't matter. White trades queens first and wins the rook on c7, and game over. So see, this move b4, if you didn't see this trick, and this, guys, this is a very important point. If you didn't see this trick with rook takes e7, let's say in a game you're calculating and you didn't see that you would have rook takes e7 here, in this position, black is perfectly fine. If we make a new rule that rook takes e7 is just not a legal move, then black would be perfectly fine in this case. And that means that this move b4, it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you already saw that tactic in advance, because otherwise you're just helping black put his queen on a more secure square. So it's sometimes can be very hard to find the winning move. And especially during a game when you have a lot of pressure and the clock is ticking, it can be very, very hard to find tactical resources, even if they're, let's say, below your level, even if you're able to find them under normal considerations. It goes to show you want to make it hard for your opponent. So good question from Mr. The Warrior Strikes. What does it take to find good moves when defending and attacking? I think actually your number one skill here is going to be just your cold concrete calculation. I think this is the most important when you're dealing with very complicated positions with lots of tactics. But another part of it is, let's say, looking for the most important squares. In some cases, it's very easy to figure out what is the critical defensive square. In this case, because we have a dark squared bishop, black strategy is pretty simple. Put all the pieces on the dark squares, control the dark squares, and you probably won't get mated. In other cases, it's not as easy. You know, knights on the board. You really just have to figure out, okay, what is the crucial square, and how can I cover it with as many pieces as possible. So it takes a lot of, let's say, examples. One book I would absolutely recommend to you guys, I'll write it in the chat as well, is called Attack and Defense. And it's by the great Russian trainer and player Mark Dvoretsky, one of the best coaches of all time. This was a book I read when I was actually around your level. I would think I was maybe 1800 or maybe 1900. I read this book, and it just shows a lot of very dynamic positions about attacking and defending, a lot of interesting resources. And I really like the book. I think it could be very useful for you guys. After b4 in the game, or not in the game, but black could also play queen d4. And here white is very close to winning. Actually, I don't think king h2 is the best move, but or maybe it is. Maybe after king h2, maybe black is in just total zugzwang. But the point is that white was able to misplace the queen from c5, and this position has become basically lost for black. I actually think king h2 is strong because now white can play a move like rook e4 and not worry about queen d1 or queen a1 coming with tempo. And once the queen is misplaced even more, the rook comes to e4 and swings around. Or if the queen is kicked off of d4, then d6 will just be winning. So white is winning in this position, but again, not an easy task to find. In the game, white played check and queen f7. I think I saw this suggested. King c8, and black was basically getting out. The bishop is supported, and the king is running to a7. Rook e6, king b7, king h2, bishop f8. And here I think already black was kind of out of the woods. Now the king has some shelter. White should still be fine because he has so many pawns, and he can. It's very hard for black to really activate this bishop without, or activate his pieces without leaving his king insecure. But eventually, white ended up winning the game. In fact, the PGN of this lesson will be available for you guys later on, so you can play through the examples. We're going to move on to another example, kind of switch gears. These first two, they were more about, well, king hunts, or running with the king, I should say. But I want to switch gears and show a different topic as well. Oh, quick question. Someone asked, after queen g8 check, why not bishop f8? I think black could do this. I think it's maybe just not necessary because now we've self-pinned, and well, b4 is now kind of an obvious move, and I think this is, you don't really want to self-pin if you don't have to, because here the queen is the only piece supporting the bishop, and after b4 it's going to be very hard to stay in contact, and we're just putting unnecessary pressure on our position. Queen d6, rook e6, and I think the queen loses touch with the bishop, and it's game over. Guys, I do apologize if I missed any of your questions about the position or in general. But you will get the PGN of the games later on, and so if you're very curious, of course, you can go and analyze yourself, and I would wholeheartedly recommend that. Okay, I want to show, we'll see if we have time. I want to show two examples from my own games. This first game I actually played quite recently, meaning like a week ago. Um, right here. So this is a game I had against a lower rated player. He's around 2150, but I mean, obviously a very strong player to reach that level. Um, I think he, yeah, is pretty close to becoming a national master in terms of USCF ratings. Um, so we have this position. It's kind of a very complicated structure, very closed position, and it's not even clear who's better in this case, um, because it seems like all of the bishops in the position are kind of restricted. And the position is very, very close. Only one set of pawns has been traded. But the evaluation of the position is that it's equal, but I do prefer black here. And I prefer black for, I think, maybe one or two reasons. The first one being I have a protected passed pawn, which is always going to be an asset for me. Right now, it's very well blockaded by the bishop, but in the future, if the position ever opens up, this protected passer is going to be really strong. And I have some pressure against white's queenside pawns here. Now, for example, if white plays a5 in this position, let's go back a move. Queen was on d2. If white had played a5, he played queen g2 instead. This would actually be playing into my hands a little bit, because after I take, the queen side is opening up, and I'm able to use this advanced pawn quite effectively. And white's bishop on c3, that's a passive piece, but white's real problem is that this bishop on f3 is actually kind of very restricted. So after a5 I take, if we take with the rook, then I want to play like rook to b7 to control the 7th rank, and rook to b8, and I'm just going to triple up on this b4 pawn and try to take it. The structure is a stonewall, but this did not come from a Dutch opening. In fact, this came from Fien Ketto Grunfeld, of all openings. So I think this would be playing into black's hand a little bit, because now I have a clear target that I didn't have 2 moves ago. And if white takes with the pawn, which is very reasonable, now white has a strong passed pawn, I do get to come in a little bit with rook to b3. I put pressure here. And if this pawn moves too far, I might be able to round it up. This structure here gives black an advantage on the queen side. We're pointing towards the queen side, and we're just kind of controlling everything. And you can start to tell, actually, my bishops are a little bit more active on the queen side than white's are. Nevertheless, the point of this example is to show that even though white's position is uncomfortable, maybe very, very slightly worse. I think computer will just give zeros, most likely, but slightly uncomfortable for white. What white does need to do in this position is not just sit back and do nothing. I think the reason I was able to win this game was because my opponent was kind of just trying to hold the fortress, and this allowed me to really maneuver all over the place and try to break through, and eventually I was able to break through and win the game. A better strategy, and this is very important, maybe one of the most important things I say in the lesson. I always save it for maybe the last quarter, so you guys keep listening. Maybe what white should be doing is looking for some kind of active counterplay, at least looking for the chance to create active counterplay. White was not able to do that in this game. He was just too focused on, let's say, staying solid and passive, and because of that, I was able to kind of get everything I want in the position, and I was able to break through. So I think what white should have done, either on this move or after queen to g2, was actually just break with g4. I think this was a very nice move to play. The idea is that we're not just going to give black a free hand. Now, given the option, if black is just given, 10 free moves, I want to just like double on the a file, maybe even transfer my queen to e8, force white to do something about this a4 pawn, create some weakness, and then try to break through. I also actually want to play g5 in this position, which was allowed in the game, and this gave me some chances on the king side as well. And because I have an attack on the queen side and the king side, I was able to eventually stretch his defense and break through. And we call that the principle of two weaknesses. I see a lot of questions about how do I find the right move or how do I find the right plan here. Actually, it seems like it's just one guy, Mr. Kolbjorn Johansson, excuse me, very concerned with how to exactly think in this position. Well, here you go. Oh, I I miswrote it. The principle of two weaknesses. Very important. This is a very common principle, especially in the endgame, but also in closed middle games this is important. The point is, if I just put all my pieces on the queen side, white will do the same and he'll be able to defend very easily. But if I have a target on the king side as well, then I can shift back and forth and white's pieces will be stretched. g4 would have prevented me from basically doing this. If I take, white takes with the bishop, and now I have to worry about the e6 pawn. The e6 pawn is a weakness. And I don't have such a free hand to just do whatever I want. If I don't do anything, then maybe white plays queen g2 and thinks about taking here, undermining the d5 pawn, opening the g file, potentially some counterplay. So the point is, when defending, you should be looking for active counterplay. Especially definitely in open positions, that goes without saying, but in closed positions too, you don't just want to sit back and wait for your opponent to open things up. In the game, queen g2 was played. I played rook a8, rook a3, bishop c6, queen c2. You see white is just shuffling while I'm kind of improving my position. And here comes g5. So let me ask you guys this. What is the point of g5? What happens after f takes g5? What do you guys think? Might not be as simple as first expected. So question for the chat. What is black's idea after f takes g5? Some interesting suggestions so far. I do like how active you guys are being. It would be nice if it was like this every month. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. After fg5, bishop takes g3, this is just the blunder. This is just giving our opponent a free piece. Takes, white plays queen g2, everything is protected, and black has given up his amazing dark squared bishop and is left with this dud on c6. Zero compensation for the piece. Sorry, guys. The idea is actually to just take back the pawn with a move. I played queen e7 in the game. Queen g7 would lead to the same thing. I put the queen on e7 because I'm also hitting this guy as well on b4. So I feel like this is just a nicer square for the queen. And white has no way of defending the g5 pawn, and once I take on g5, then I'm going to have a lot of pressure on the king side. I can use the h pawn and so on. The main tactical point for you guys to notice is that h4 leaves g3 unprotected, and then I take the g3 pawn for free. I don't have to give up my bishop, and then white's pawns are very, very weak. White has no way of defending this h4 pawn in a reasonable way. Like, he can play bishop e1, and then I have a choice. I can take and take on b4, or I can drop back and just put pressure on b4 as well. So h4 would be making things worse. White played queen d2, I took on g5, queen f2, rook c7, king h8. And now, after this move, king h8, I want to play h5, h4. And at some point, I'm going to shift my rooks over to the king side, and I'm just going to crash through on g3. And it's very hard for white to defend with his rooks on the a file. So finally, my opponent played a5. Finally realizing that he just can't sit back and wait, he needs to get some activity. I took on a5, rook takes a5, and rook b8. Just reminding him that he has another weakness on b4, and this is the principle of two weaknesses in very nice form. So here was the last critical moment in this game. And this is, again, one of the main reasons I'm showing this from a class about defense. In fact, let me switch it to White's perspective. So when you're defending, you should be looking for any kind of active opportunity. So White could play b5 here, but this pawn just becomes weaker. I mean, he could have played it earlier, but it would have been a weakness. Here, I think I can just take it. So what could White do in this case? How does White create counterplay? Well, White had an option to play e4 here, to break. And this was a very strong move because White would then be eliminating one of his weaknesses on e3 and opening up the position a little more to give him more chances for counterplay. If the position remains just static and closed and stodgy, then Black just builds up and it's game over. But if White plays e4 and opens things up, then White has some chances as well. The idea is that we're trying to open up the bishop against the king. And if you're just thinking in purely defensive terms, you wouldn't see this idea because you're not looking for the active opportunities. So look for active counterplay, look for active opportunities. Don't just remain in passivity while you're defending. Very, very important lesson, especially for club players. F takes c4 is met with bishop takes e4. And the first point is that, okay, the bishop can't even be taken because queen on g5 is hanging. And then after d takes e4, White would take the queen. But even if this queen wasn't hanging, White would have d5 check, opening up the bishop, winning back the piece, and gaining some counterplay. Of course, this is kind of irrelevant here because the queen was just hanging, but you see the point. There was a lot of potential here. Okay, actually, to answer Mr. Johansson's point or question, but it's actually a very reasonable question. After g5, White was under no obligation to take on g5 because I'm not necessarily threatening the f4 pawn. So he didn't have to take on g5. In fact, I think this wasn't the best move. A better move would have been just to be solid with queen d2 or to play a5 right away. But Black can still put pressure because I would still play king h8, I would still double my rooks on the g file, and then I would take, whoops, at the right moment and try to break through. Or I can play g4 and then h5, h4 and then attack here and then transfer my rooks to the h file. That was also a very reasonable idea. So it would have been better for White to just ignore the g5 pawn, but at this point the evaluation doesn't really change. Black is going to have pressure on both sides of the board, and it's going to be very hard for White. So in the game, my opponent missed his chance to play e4. Instead, he just kind of kept shuffling. And we ended up trading rooks. I got in with my bishop, bishop a4, bishop d1. And once the light squared bishops were traded, this position was just over. Because now White has a number of weaknesses. e3, b4. I played h5, h4 and attacked here as well. The light squares were weak. In fact, I ended up winning this in the endgame. Just to show you guys for what's the word for closure. We ended up trading queens, and Black's king was able to get in. And it seems like White defended well because the whole time he was. I mean, he prolonged the game until the very end game, but the whole game, you know, he was so passive that it's like that it wasn't really a successful defense. It wasn't ever in doubt that Black was going to keep pressing and pressing and pressing, and eventually I was able to win with this nice switch. Another illustration of the principle of two weaknesses. Here we have one weakness, white was able to defend, and at the right moment, rook h8 was played, coming down this way, and game is over. If the king had moved to f1, bishop takes g3 would happen anyways because rook on b2 is hanging, and white was forced to resign in this position. Even though the b pawn is still running, it's controlled by the bishop, and game over. Well, guys, we're going to wrap up the lesson here. I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, you were here. This topic was about some of the more practical aspects of defending in chess. To sum up the lesson, number one, never give up. I always start with that. Because there are so many winning positions in the history of the game that have been lost because one side got excited and missed the winning continuation or got too excited, miscalculated, blundered something. So number one, be stubborn. Keep fighting. Try to make it as difficult as your opponent as possible to win and break through. Number two, look for the most important critical defensive squares and try to construct your pieces in a very harmonious way. This is really important when you're taking a walk with your king. If your king is out in the middle of the board, you want to protect it with minor pieces, with knights that are supporting each other, or if you have a bishop, then you want to control that color square. And lastly, when you're defending in, let's say, closed positions, you need to look for active counterplay. You don't want to just sit back and think you have a fortress and then let your opponent hammer and hammer and hammer until he completely opens up, and then your position just collapses. Even if it feels like you're holding, your best chance is just going to be to go for active counterplay. And who knows, you might even win the game by retaking the initiative. It was like Carlsen said in the World Championship match, he doesn't believe in fortresses, and neither should you. Always look for active counterplay. Alright guys, we're wrapping it up here. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Really appreciate everyone tuning in for the live class. I think it was a lot of fun. It's actually, it didn't even, it felt like it went by so quickly because the chat was always, I could always just look for the chat and there's always all these great questions. I do apologize if I didn't get to your question. Hopefully next time. And I'll see you guys in the next class. Take care.